So let's recap on what we've done so far. We've looked at recording a macro, manipulating the code to create a sheet, to create a new sheet, and then manipulating the code to delete the sheets. In both of those cases, we've used loops to perform a task multiple times. So what are we doing in this video? Well, we're going to take things a step further. When we create a new sheet, we're going to look at naming the sheets and then putting some data onto that sheet as well. What we're looking at is taking a database with rows of data and then taking each one of those rows, taking information from the row and putting that onto a separate sheet, which is something, if you were doing manually, would take a really long time. But with Excel VBA, with loops, we can speed that up really quickly. So let's get into the spreadsheet. So this is what we've been working on until now. I've just got a simple database here. I've got some employee information. As I mentioned, I'm looking at breaking up each of these rows into a separate sheet. So we've got about 22 employees, 22 rows here. For each row, I want to create a separate sheet. So what is on that separate sheet? Well, as you can see, just some simple information. I've taken the employee number, the employee year of birth and days of service. So just some simple information. It doesn't matter too much what it is. We just want to practice the technique. So how would we go about doing that? Well, if we think of the skills we've learned so far, we've looked at creating a new sheet and deleting sheets because we'll need to do both of those things. But we're going to introduce the idea of offset, which is one of my favorite VBA constructs because it's so good for manipulating information to get words and numbers where you want them to be on a sheet in Excel. Super powerful when combined with loops and with a counter variable, can get a lot of work done very quickly. So that's what we're looking at in this video, breaking up this database into individual sheets. So how are we going to start to do that? Well, always with coding, it's best not to start with a blank sheet. Usually we would record some code, or you might have some pre-existing code to start with. That's good practice. You don't usually have to start with a blank sheet. So what have we got in the bank, if you like? What have we done so far? Well, in the first video, we had a look at duplicating a sheet, so creating new sheets. So what can we do with this code? How can we make it useful for us now? Well, let's see what it's doing. It's selecting the first sheet and then copying that in after the first sheet in the workbook. So copying it as the second sheet in the workbook. So as a starting point, this looks pretty useful. It's going to allow us to copy some sheets. We've also got a loop in here, as you remember, but just looking at this loop, for testing purposes, certainly in the initial stages, I don't want to use the loop because I just want to understand what the code is doing before I start looping through it. If I loop through it 100 times, every time I test it, it's going to take a very long time testing. So for the time being, it's best just to turn the loop off. The easiest way to do that, stick an inverted comma by the lines of code that you want Excel to ignore. That means that the line of code will become an annotation and Excel will ignore it when it goes through the code. But it also means we don't have to delete it. We can very easily bring it back later. So I've got the code here, selecting the sheet and copying it after the first sheet as the second sheet in the workbook. I'm just going to play it to see what happens. I'm going to run the code to see what happens. So I would expect the Dep 1 sheet to appear again as the second sheet in the workbook. So I'm just playing the code and there it is. We can see that it's appeared again. So that seems to be working well. I'm going to delete that for the time being. So that's a good start. We've got some code here for copying a sheet. But we've got to think about what we actually want on the sheet and particularly what we want the name of the sheet to be, because as you can see, the name of the sheet I want to correspond with the employee number so that we have one sheet for each employee and the employee number is the name of that sheet. So how would we go about doing that? Well, it would be a good start to copy the second sheet. So I'm going to just adjust this code. Rather than copying the first sheet, I'm going to change this to copying the second sheet. You'll notice here I haven't used the name of the sheet. I've used a different referencing technique, which is the index number. So if we just put a number in here, we don't need speech marks. If we just put a number in, it will take the sheet in the workbook that corresponds with that number. This line of code, sheets brackets 2.select, means select the second sheet in the workbook. Okay, I can go a step further than that. I can put the 2 in there, and then I don't need this line of code at all. So this is going to copy the second sheet in after the first sheet. So it's going to copy it as the second sheet in the workbook. It would be better to copy it as the third sheet in the workbook to make it the final sheet in the workbook. So I'm just going to change that to number 2. So again, play the code, see what happens. Okay, seems to be working well. The sheet has copied in as the third sheet in the workbook. So everything's good so far. So next, let's go back to the Visual Basic Editor. I want to change the name of the sheet to the first employee number. So I can do that by using active sheet.name. So the active sheet is going to be the new sheet that Excel creates when it copies the first sheet. That will become the active sheet. So we can use the term active sheet.name, and then we want that to equal this cell. Okay, because that's the cell that contains the first employee number. That is cell B8. So I can reference that by saying sheets 1, again using the index number. I could use the name of the sheet. It's often easier to use the index number. Dot range, so the range on that sheet, B8. Okay. So once again, let's just try running that code and let's see what happens. Okay, we can see we've got an error message. That's because the name is already taken. Excel has explained. I've tried to create a sheet with a name that already exists in the workbook on a different worksheet. So Excel has helpfully told us that you can't do that. But that's fine. So that's still created the sheet. So everything seems to be going pretty well. I'm going to delete the sheet I created. I'm going to get round this name issue by just renaming the sheet. Let's call it test. Okay. I'm going to run this code one more time to check that we avoid that error this time, and we do. Okay, we've managed to create a new sheet. It's taken the test sheet, which is the second sheet in the workbook, and copied it as the third sheet, and then given it a name, and the name is the value in this cell, because in the code that's what we asked it to do. Okay, it's also taken the data. You can see here we've got some data. That's because we had some data on the test sheet. So I'm just going to delete this data because I don't want that data to be copied onto every sheet. And then I'm going to delete this sheet as well because we're not going to need it again. Okay, so we've managed to create a new sheet and we've managed to control the name of the new sheet, and the name corresponds with the employee number, which is great. Okay, so now let's look at putting some data, some simple data in the new sheet that we create. So in some of the cells, let's take some information out of the database, put it in there. So how would we go about doing that? Well, again, the active sheet term is going to help us. Active sheet dot range, and let's put the information in cell B3. Seems like a sensible starting point. You know, it's kind of near the top, nice and visible. Cell B3 dot value equals, and then here let's put the employee number again here. So sheets 1 dot range B8. Okay, and you can see that I'm copying and pasting code there. It's always better to copy and paste than to keep typing things. At this point, I'm going to put some annotations in so that I can easily remember what I'm doing. Let's first say copy sheet name here, and then second an annotation, and let's say employee number. Okay, so I can just look at the annotations quickly and see what's going on. I'm also going to decrease the indentation here to keep it on the screen nicely for you. Okay, so we're copying a new sheet and controlling the name of the sheet, making the name of the sheet the employee number, and then we're putting some information on the sheet as well. So once again, let's just roll that and give it a try. So put my cursor in the routine, hit the play button, and again, seems to be working well. The name of the sheet is the employee number, and then the employee number is appearing here too. Seems to be working well. But I don't just want the employee number. I want, I think it was the employee year of birth and the employee days of service. So to do that, I'm going to just copy these lines of code because it's kind of similar what I'm trying to do, taking information out of the database. I can just tweak this code to get it working for me. So I want some information in B3, some information in B4, some information in B5. And then where is this information on the first sheet? Well, the employee number is in B8, the birth year is in E8, and the day's service is in G8. So I can take that information and put it into the code, E8 and G8. And we can update the annotations as well. So E8 was the birth year. So I just put B year. And then G8 was the service. Just tidy that up a little bit. I'll say Y service for year service. Okay. So what are we expecting now? Well, we're expecting it to create a sheet and the name of the sheet to be the employee number and to copy this information. So the employee number, the birth year and the year service for it's actually day service, isn't it? Day service for the employee. Okay, so I'm going to delete this sheet once more and then go back into the code and then just hit run, sorry, and then let's see what's happened. Okay, so it seems to be working well. Employee 472 and the name of the sheet is right, that's the employee number, and then the birth year 1962 and day service 10,754. That's copied across pretty well. We can see there's a slight formatting issue here. So to fix that, I'm going to go back to the test page, which is where we're copying from, and just play with the formatting a little bit and just see how this is looking. Okay, I'm going to copy the formats from this cell down into these cells just to make sure the formatting is consistent. Okay, that doesn't particularly matter. I'm just trying to get it looking as good as I can. Okay, so this seems to be going pretty well. So we've created a sheet with the information we need. So what's the next step? Well, we've done it for one employee, created that sheet, but we don't just want to do it for one employee. We want to harness the power of loops to loop through the whole database and get that information for all of the employees. So how would we go about doing that? Well, you guessed it, a counter is going to help, and we're going to use the counter variable again. We're going to bring that in, but I don't want 100 sheets. I'm just going to do it for, let's say, 3 employees for the time being. For the purposes of this video, 3 employees. And then let's just run the code and let's see what happens. You know, we would expect 3 sheets to be copied. And let's just have a look at what happens. I'm going to run the code. Okay, so I've got to debug this. That's because you would have seen the error that came up. Excel again is complaining that I'm trying to name a sheet by a name that already exists. So why is that happening? Well, it's happening because I've created one sheet with this employee number, and then I've tried to create another sheet with the same employee number. And Excel is stopping me doing that because it creates an error. What we actually want to do for the next sheet is use the next employee number down. And with the corresponding data, use the next row down in the database. So we want to move down the database 1 row for each sheet. So how do we do that? Well, now I can introduce one of my favorite VBA tools, techniques, which is offset and position control. So let's go back to the Visual Basic editor. Before I do so, I'm just going to tidy up here a little bit, delete the sheets that I don't need. Let's delete these two. Okay, back to the Visual Basic editor. And we're going to introduce offset into the code to get it moving down that database. So it goes down one row for each sheet. So ActiveSheet.name sheets1.range B8. So it's going to start on B8. So the first time through the loop, it's going to use B8, but the second time through the loop, we want it to use B9. So how do we do that? Well, let's try using offset. So I want to offset from B8 by the value of counter -1 and then no cells across. Okay, let's try that. So let's look at the code quickly. So rather than just using range B8, we are offsetting. So we're moving away from B8 by the value of counter -1. So the first time we go through the loop, counter is 1 and 1 minus 1 is 0. So the first time we go through the loop, we're not going to move away from that cell at all. So Excel will use range B8. That's the first time we go through the loop. Remember, every time we go through the loop, the value of counter increases by 1. The second time we go through the loop, counter is going to be 2. 2 minus 1 is 1, which means that Excel will offset from B8 by 1 cell down. So we'll go 1 row down. So rather than using B8, we should, if everything works, use B9. Okay, and then the next time it goes through the loop, counter will equal 3. So it will move that reference down 1 row again. This is the power of offset and combining it with the counter variable. But we don't know if it works yet. So let's give it a go. Again, I'm just going to hit play. Let's see what happens. Well, it's good news. There hasn't been any errors, which is good news. And let's see, well, looking down at the bottom, we've got 3 different sheet names here. We've got 472, 695, and 470. And that looks good. That corresponds with our database, 472, 695, and 470. But what is on those sheets? Well, it will probably be the same information because I haven't put the offset function, the offset commands I've put into the first line of code here, but you'll notice I haven't yet put it in to the remainder of the code. So the remainder of the code is going to reference the same information for each sheet. And we can see there CO472, here CO472, and again CO472. So how can we finish this off? Well, we need to introduce offset into the remaining lines of code in exactly the same way. I'm going to just maneuver the Visual Basic Editor so you can see this on your screenshots. So again, sheets1.rangeB8.offset. In fact, I'm just going to copy and paste this line of code into here. Okay, I think you can just about see that. And in here, and finally from G8, copy and paste that in. Okay, so now we've got offset on each line of code. So for example, if we're looking at the employee number, it's going to offset from B8. Let's go back to the spreadsheet. B8 is here. Going to offset from B8 by the value of counter -1. The first time we go through the loop, counter is 1. The second time it's 2. The third time it's 3. Okay, so the first time 1 minus 1 is 0. There will be no offset from B8, so it will reference cell B8. The second time, counter equals 2. 2 minus 1 is 1, so it will offset 1 row down from B8. So you get the idea. Every time you go through the loop, Excel moves 1 row down the database. Okay, we're only doing it 3 times, but you could do it 100 times. Many times, save you lots and lots of time. But we haven't tested it yet, so let's just give this a go. I'm going to just clear out these sheets, the sheets that we created before. Just delete those. I could, of course, use the code that we created to delete sheets. I could do that, but with 3 sheets, it's easy enough just to do the mouse clicks. Okay, so let's have a final look at the code. Everything seems to be in order there. Okay, so let's give it a go. So I've just played it, no errors, and we can see we've got 3 employee numbers as names. The employee numbers correspond with the first 3 rows in the spreadsheet. That's good. But have we also copied the right information? So I'm going to have a look at employee 470. So I would expect to see 1979 as the date and day service 4875. Okay. So employee 470 there, and 1979 is the birth year, and 4875 should be the days of service, and that seems to be working well. Let's just check 695 as well. 695, 1988, 1435, 695, 1988, 1435. Okay, so it seems to be working well. We've done a test there, and I'm satisfied that the technique has worked. Okay, so that's as far as we're going to go in this video. Hopefully you've got a feel for, firstly, just how powerful loops are and how you can use a counter variable to control how many times you go up and down through a loop. But you can do more than that. Once you start controlling positioning using the offset command, you can start manipulating data, putting things where you need them to be, getting data out of a database and putting it somewhere else to display it nicely in a different sheet. Incredibly powerful techniques that hopefully will save you a lot of time. In the next video, I'm going to go back to our original task and apply the techniques that we've learnt, creating new sheets using VBA, deleting sheets of VBA, and then using offset to manipulate information using VBA, applying those techniques to take information from a database and to manipulate it into lots of different sheets to complete the task that we set out to do at the start. I hope you wish me luck, and I'll see you in the next video.